Hello. This lecture is set up so that I can go over what is going to occur now that you're building your mini lecture. To begin, I'll review what we've accomplished thus far. Initially, each of the researchers were assigned both a period and a movement. You were working with a partner in either research twins or research triplets. You answered the research questions to begin your initial research, and we went through all of the roundtable work that each researcher and the research partners produce. Now, I do have to say that as we move forward, I'd like a little bit more engagement between researchers as opposed to just going around the room to just tell us what you've done. This is not a criticism of what you've done thus far. What it does show me, we need to incorporate a little bit more interaction, not only with how your research has been produced, but what you're going to do with the research. As we move forward with winding up PRO1, when we get back, you will find that the next PRO2 are going to have a little bit of a different bent to it. So what you've done so far is you collected the initial research. Now it's time to put your research in a chronological order. So how you answered the research questions, the artist/artists that you chose should have a chronological structure. So when I discuss supporting material on this slide, you want to look at your relevant dates, the individuals that were involved not only in commissioning the work, but also the artists and the locations and what was going on outside of where the artwork was being produced. And you have followed a structure based on how I set up the questions, which is perfectly acceptable. And it does give each of you a basis to understand how you go about doing any kind of formal research. One of the things that you do need to realize is that the difference in what we're doing in this class versus a class where you're expected to write X number of pages as a research project is significantly different because of the outcome. In this situation, you have the basic tools now to start looking at research that can be used in a more formal setting. We have two different ways that we can structure the mini lecture. So on the left-hand side, this is the research question format. Basically, what you would do here is exactly what you did when you presented your work in the roundtable classes. The difference is that instead of reading the little paragraph synopsis that you had all included in the initial research during the roundtable presentations, you would take that information and break it down into its component parts. You would include that information with any visuals that would support it, and you can follow the structure of the research questions. So you would provide the slides chronologically. You would allow subsequent slides to present the answers to each of the research questions as you researched it, and then you would culminate the presentation with representative artwork from your period and movement and the selected artists. You can include a comparison of either contemporary artists with the artist you picked or what came before in the preceding period and or movement, as well as what came afterwards. So that's a very straightforward, basic mini lecture format. Now, on the other side of the equation, if you go to look at the right side of the screen with researcher format, now this changes the whole dynamic. You can have full control over how you want to present this, and you could determine what is the key piece of your research that you want to lead with? How do you want to incorporate the research questions so that they don't follow the research format, the research question format? And this presentation gives you more flexibility as a researcher to compile the knowledge that you've gained through the research and working with your research partners to the rest of class. Now, I've created 2 lectures that I will be presenting to you to represent both of these formats, and they will be standalone lectures. Here's a little bit more information on how you can structure each one of these formats. With the research question, your slides will be chronological, and I think that's true in both cases. You're going to include information related to the research questions themselves. And you don't have to write the research question for each one of your slides. You can incorporate the society as being, the opening slide. You can bring in the political, social, religious, cultural aspects of your period and your movement, and then bring in your artist and the artworks as you did when you did the initial research. What you want to think about here is that art history is formatted in chronological order. So we want to keep that in mind. And that is the reason why PRO1 was set up by movements and periods chronologically. Now, we will have 1 or 2 of the presentations be out of chronological order, but that can't be helped. So we're not going to worry about that. And for subsequent classes, if I use this again, that may be the case as well, depending on how things fall. As you look at your research, we talked about keywords within the research. You need to pull those keywords out and use those keywords as prompts for each of the slides in your mini lecture, because you're not going to read from the slides. That's really important here, because it's not only doing the actual research, compiling the research material, but many researchers actually do attempt to present their research in a formal setting, such as a conference. Our formal setting is our classroom. And the goal here is that with what each researcher will produce in the mini lecture will give the entire class and set of researchers a full experience, the 1400s to the 1800s. That 400 period is going to be represented by each of the research partners' presentations. And you want to be consistent, and you can refer to other periods as it's relevant, other artists as it's relevant. Most of the political structure up until we get to the middle of the 18th century are either monarchies or city-states. And the monarchies were mostly in the north and to the northwest, and France, England, Spain. In the south, we had mostly city-states, especially in Italy. Now, with the researcher format, we have the structural overview is created by what the researcher is considering to be important. The questions and the structure from the initial research and the roundtable are just the starting point. They're not the format that you have to follow. You are using a chronological base, but it doesn't have to follow exactly as a historical text would present it. I mean, obviously, if we're working with the early Renaissance, and then we're looking as we move through this and we start looking at Northern Renaissance, and we start making comparisons, there are going to be some overlap with chronology. There will be some similarities in media. There will be innovations in media. There will be changes in how subject matter is being portrayed. In the research format for the mini lecture, it's completely up to the researcher to decide how this gets structured. in a word, this is more work. You have to think outside of the box. You have to collate your research to a level that not only makes sense for your period, movement, and artist, but also keeps in mind that the researcher that starts before and after your presentation may be slightly different, but that it should still have some coherence. And this is something that I hope to work on with PRO2, where there's going to be a little bit more global collaboration within the class structure in general. I'm not going to read all these bullet points, but they will give you the jumping off point to if you choose to do the research or format.